Hello guys, welcome to the movie recap review. Happy watching.
Cameron.
I know you're a vampire.
Do you?
No.
The film opens with Cameron waking up next to Diane, the love of his life. Diane urges him to stay in bed a bit longer, but Cameron needs to get to work. They share a kiss, but then he abruptly wakes up, realizing it was just a dream. Downstairs, Cameron's father, Hunter, confronts him about taking his life more seriously and figuring out his next steps. Cameron has just graduated high school and needs to decide whether to pursue college or something else. Hunter believes it's time for Cameron to think about his future beyond the toys he still enjoys. However, Cameron's mother, Carol, defends her son, suggesting that he deserves a break. Hunter reluctantly agrees to give Cameron 3 weeks to come up with a plan for his future. Already running late for work, Cameron heads out, but not before upsetting Carol, who wanted him to have a proper breakfast. He grabs his bike and pedals off through the neighborhood. At the ice cream shop where he works, Cameron arrives to find his boss, Lenny, waiting for him. Lenny asks Cameron to close up that night, but Cameron has a date with Diane and can't stay late. Lenny is skeptical, believing Diane is out of Cameron's league. His colleague Liz, who has her own feelings about Cameron, looks disheartened when she hears about the date. Outside, Liz and Cameron chat, and it becomes clear that Lenny is making her close up that night, which frustrates her further. Liz is also bothered by Cameron's relationship with Diane, but Cameron dismisses her concerns and heads off without giving them much thought. Cameron rides his bike home, and as he arrives, he spots Diane looking stunning. Mesmerized by her, he instinctively pulls out his phone, his gaze lingering on her. Before he can snap out of it, a group of bullies notices and starts taunting him, accusing him of trying to take pictures of her. Diane steps in to stop the bullying, but they claim Cameron was creeping on her. Flustered, Cameron insists he was just texting her, but with his phone now in their hands, they throw it into the street where it shatters. Cameron explains to Diane that Chad, one of the bullies, broke his phone, but Diane sends both Chad and Jason home. She then questions Cameron about the supposed photos, but he assures her that he didn't want any pictures of her like that. Later that night, Cameron is in his room when he notices an attractive woman in the house next door. Curious, he turns off his light to avoid being seen and watches as she changes. Just then, his mom walks in, catching him in the act. Embarrassed, Cameron quickly shuts the curtains and dismisses his mom. Once she's gone, he can't resist sneaking another look, but this time, the woman spots him. At dinner, Cameron is distracted, picking at his food while worrying more about his broken phone than anything else. His dad, Hunter, refuses to buy him a new one. Frustrated that Cameron didn't stand up to Chad, who's been bullying him for years. Carol tries to mediate, but Hunter remains firm, pushing Cameron to take responsibility. Just then, the doorbell rings. Cameron gets up to answer it, half expecting it to be the mysterious woman from next door. But when he opens the door, it's Diane, ready for their date. She hadn't been able to reach him because of his broken phone. They head out for the evening, driving to a pizza place and chatting along the way. As they settle in at the restaurant, things seem to be going well, until Martin, a guy Diane has been avoiding, walks in. Oblivious to her discomfort, Cameron waves him over, and Martin joins them. The encounter quickly turns awkward, with Diane growing visibly uncomfortable as Martin tries to make conversation. Cameron laughs awkwardly as the tension with Martin escalates, but Diane doesn't find it funny at all. When she walks out of the restaurant, Cameron follows her. The car ride home is silent and tense. He eventually asks why she suddenly turned cold, but she hesitates to open up. After a moment, Diane confesses that Martin stood her up at senior prom, which is why she's uncomfortable around him. As they continue talking, the mood softens, and they lean in for a kiss, until Cameron spots the woman from his window standing in the driveway. Panicked, he abruptly runs inside, leaving Diane confused. Inside, Cameron checks the window and sees the woman again, but before he can react, she disappears. He searches for her, and suddenly, she confronts him. Introducing herself as Victoria, she explains she's house-sitting for the neighbors. Cameron, flustered and apologetic, offers her a way out so his parents won't hear about the strange encounter. Victoria takes advantage of the situation and asks him for a ride, which Cameron reluctantly agrees to. As they drive, Cameron nervously tries to flirt, asking about her boyfriend and learning he's dead. When he asks her age, Victoria ignores him and instead directs him to pull into an empty parking lot. The place is closed, and Victoria takes his car keys before getting out, leaving Cameron trapped. She meets a man at the door, and Cameron watches as the man lets her inside. Suspicious, Cameron steps out to investigate, only to see the man suddenly bolt out of the building in terror. Panicking, Cameron rushes back to his car and locks the doors, only to see Victoria calmly emerge moments later. Before he can react, she grabs the man and bites his neck, killing him on the spot. Cameron freaks out, trying to escape, but Victoria catches him with ease. Laughing at his fear, she tells him to relax. She's a vampire. From now on, he's her personal chauffeur, and if he refuses, she'll make sure he regrets it. As if to seal the deal, she leans in and kisses him. The next morning, Cameron is interrogated by his dad about the bloodstains on the car. Just as things start to heat up, Victoria appears and coolly explains that a deer had jumped in front of the car, causing the mess. She charms Hunter into believing the story, even convincing him to let Cameron keep the car so he can drive her wherever she needs. While working, Cameron is chatting with Lenny about his date with Diane when Liz informs him that someone wants to see him outside. It's Martin, who's looking for another chance with Diane. Cameron agrees to speak with Diane on Martin's behalf and later relays Martin's request to her. Diane finds Cameron's efforts sweet and, despite his own feelings, agrees to give Martin another shot. That night, Cameron drives Victoria as usual. He's learned that it's better not to pry into her reasons for their nocturnal activities. When they arrive at their destination, Cameron stays in the car while Victoria goes inside. She returns later, and Cameron watches as she cleans up. After washing the blood from the car, they head back home. Later, as Cameron sleeps, he wakes up to find Victoria in his bed. She reveals that she's about 247 years old and that her previous partner was killed by vampires for resisting, which led to her becoming one herself. The next morning, Martin wakes Cameron, seeking advice on how to impress Diane for their upcoming date. They agree that Cameron will join them on the date. That evening, as Cameron and Diane talk, he mentions his plans with another girl, keeping his rendezvous with Victoria a secret. Excited about the thrill of their vampire hunts, Cameron is eager for their next adventure. Victoria has 2 more targets before her final confrontation with a particularly powerful vampire. They arrive at the location, and Victoria sneaks through the basement. A security guard spots her, and a confrontation ensues. Victoria is shot, but she quickly retaliates, killing the guard. Cameron, who also gets caught in the crossfire, is left injured on the floor. Victoria, furious at him for coming after her, tends to his wounds. They decide to skip their planned adventure the following night. Cameron asks Victoria to help him avoid the triple date with Diane and Martin, and she reluctantly agrees. The next day, Liz works up the courage to ask Cameron out on a date, and he surprisingly says yes. However, because of his busy schedule, he can't make it to the concert they planned. Later that evening, Cameron joins Martin and Diane for their date, but Martin is too awkward to carry the conversation. Cameron tries to help, but it becomes clear that Martin and Diane just don't click. When Diane excuses herself to the bathroom, Victoria shows up and criticizes Cameron for pushing Martin and Diane together when he's the one in love with her. They drive to Cameron's job, where Chad and Jason are hanging around. Nervous about confronting them, Cameron stays in the car, but Victoria confidently steps out to handle the situation. She taunts Chad until he throws a punch, forcing Cameron into a fight. Although he's clearly not a fighter, Victoria coaches him, telling him to aim for Chad's ribs. Cameron lands a punch, gaining confidence, though he hurts his hand in the process. Afterward, Chad, confused by Victoria's presence, tries to ask who she is, but she plays coy. Cameron, now hurt from the fight, is offered something by Victoria to make him feel better. He drinks it, only to realize later that it was her blood. Almost immediately, his wounds heal and he feels a surge of energy. That night, as Cameron lies in bed, imagining being with Diane, Victoria appears beside him. Grateful for his loyalty, they start making out passionately until his father barges in, interrupting them. Cameron stops things before they go further, and Victoria vanishes back to her house. The next morning, Cameron and his father share an awkward but knowing smile over what happened the night before. Outside, Martin, still upset about being left on his date with Diane, tries to get Cameron's help again, but Cameron drives off, uninterested. Meanwhile, Diane runs into Victoria at her workplace, though Victoria has her own reasons for being there. At work, Liz listens to Cameron's recent troubles and convinces him to go out with her that night to the concert. Cameron later seeks advice from his dad, who warns him that if he tries to juggle too many girls at once, he might end up with none at all. As Cameron steps outside, he decides to check on Victoria before leaving. Peering through the window, he's stunned to see Diane cozied up on Victoria's couch, sharing an intimate moment. Victoria then leads Diane to her bedroom, leaving Cameron heartbroken as he watches through the window. Meanwhile, Liz is left waiting for Cameron, who never shows up. The next morning, Cameron sees Diane leaving Victoria's place and driving away. Victoria, believing she's helping Cameron move on from someone he's not meant to be with, provokes his anger. Cameron, furious, tells her he no longer wants to be involved. Victoria insists that Cameron will continue to follow her plans. Later, Cameron finds Martin in the woods and convinces him to pursue Diane again, setting up another date. Cameron then quits his job and, outside, finds Liz furious about him missing their date. She punches him, venting her frustration. Determined, Cameron goes to see Diane to get a new outfit for Martin's date and persuades her to join him on the date as well. Later, Cameron's mom secretly buys him a new phone. With the new phone, Cameron and Martin strategize using an earpiece to keep the conversation going during the date. During the date, Cameron feeds Martin clever lines, which helps him charm Diane. However, Cameron witnesses something shocking. Diane is a vampire and bites Martin. Distraught, Cameron goes to find Liz, but Diane confronts him outside. Diane reveals that Martin is now a vampire and explains she didn't tell him earlier because she feared his reaction and losing him. Back in his room, Victoria reveals she knew about Diane all along and that Diane is her final target. Victoria has set a trap for Diane using Cameron as bait, while his parents are out on a date. Diane, now exposed, encounters Lenny, who has discovered her secret. To protect her, Diane turns Lenny into a vampire. Diane and Martin then enter Cameron's house. Victoria and Diane engage in a fierce battle, but Victoria discovers that Diane isn't responsible for her lover's death. The true killer was Diane's master. The movie concludes with Cameron deciding to write a book about vampires. He reconciles with Liz, explaining the truth behind the chaos. Though skeptical, Liz gives him another chance, acknowledging the reality of his wild story.
And that's the end of the story. I hope you liked it. Comment down below what movies do you like us to recap next. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Until next time.